Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to cover this topic with you today. We're covering diversity and accessibility in the age of generative AI. This is a 100-level course, so no matter what your experience level, your experience with accessibility, your experience with diversity, everyone is welcome, and we are happy to have you here. And I hope everyone's enjoying the conference, and especially this beautiful city of Philadelphia. Statistics continue to demonstrate the underrepresentation of women, people with disabilities, and other diverse voices in cybersecurity. And despite ongoing inclusion, diversity, and equity efforts across organizations, this continues to be an epidemic problem. Efforts to increase diversity and inclusivity are essential to fostering a dynamic workforce. In this session, we will cover the current state of underrepresentation and the impact that it has on organizations. We'll discuss why it's important to amplify these diverse voices, and Amani is going to present a really great case study for you today on how to build security solutions that are designed to be accessible for everybody in the age of generative AI. We're then going to wrap up with what AWS is doing to be more accessible, providing you with some resources to take back to your organization. But first, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Ashley Smick. I'm a Principal Technical Program Manager at AWS in our Global Services team. I'm also a 9-year Amazonian, and I am super passionate about ID&E efforts. I'm an inclusion ambassador at AWS. I'm also a member of our People with Disabilities affinity group, and I'm also proud to say that 5 years ago, I championed the AWS strategic partnership along with WESIS, Women in Cybersecurity, and one of our nonprofit partners, to help drive the diverse voices in security. Amani?
So, hi everybody, my name is Amani Johnson. I have been at Amazon for about 5 years now. I am a member of the Black Employee Network. I'm also an inclusion ambassador, and I'm also a member of the Alliance for Accessibility. The Alliance for Accessibility is an organization that is here at Amazon, and we believe in making sure that each and every product that we have can be used for people with disabilities. We participate in things such as bug smashing. We do things where we have to advocate for people with disabilities, and we try and to make sure that they have the necessary tools that they need in order to be able to complete tasks. We educate others on the importance of accessibility, and we just really try to make sure that we're passionate about things that require accessible features in order to be able to complete products and tasks that need to be done.
Awesome. So Amani and I are super excited to be here, and we're going to hop right into the content. So first, let's talk about the current state of underrepresentation. Sorry. The number of professionals working in the cybersecurity industry was estimated to be over 1.3 million in the US and 5.5 million globally. Yet despite ongoing ID&E efforts, the cybersecurity industry is underrepresented in terms of gender, disability, and ethnicity. According to recent studies, 24% of cybersecurity professionals are women. 30% of those women had felt discriminated against at one point in their workplace. People with disabilities represents the largest minority group globally. According to the World Health Organization, over 1.3 billion people experience a disability. That is 16% of the world's total population, of which 25% of cybersecurity professionals are people with a disability. That means a significant portion of the global population is a person with a disability, and it affects how they live, how they consume content, and how they build. And what a lot of us don't realize is that at any given point in time, any one of us could be a person living with a disability, whether it's a medical diagnosis or some type of accident. And lastly, 26% of cybersecurity professionals are ethnic and racial minorities. This includes Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Indigenous people. So as you can tell, we still have some work to do. So why does this matter? What is the impact of underrepresentation, especially in cybersecurity? It can impact global organizations by limiting their ability to thrive in a global marketplace and may lead to missed opportunities and growth and success. Lack of diverse perspectives, experiences can lead to the effectiveness of security measures. Cybersecurity threats from a wide range of sources and target diverse populations. If there's a lack of diversity in your cybersecurity team, you may miss that ability to understand and respond effectively to these threats. There's also diversity of cybersecurity teams can lead to a variety of viewpoints and approaches to solving problems faster and fostering more innovation and creating and developing effective security solutions. Cybersecurity threats and attacks can vary across regions, industries, demographics, and groups. Without a diverse workforce to provide those insights into the concerns and vulnerabilities of various communities and organizations may not fully understand how to adequately protect against those threats. Also, inclusivity and user-centric security is super important. Again, without diversity, your cybersecurity workforce can also lead to security measures that don't adequately meet the needs of your customers or in your experiences of the diverse groups. And you could potentially be leaving certain populations out. Obviously, there's recruiting and retention challenges. Organizations that lack diversity in their workforce can be seen as lacking inclusivity, which can impact the organization's ability to attract and retain talent. There's an interesting study. According to a CNBC survey, 80% of respondents said they want to work for a company that values inclusion, diversity, and equity. If you even think about yourself when you're applying for a job, you think about the interview panel, right? You think about the morals and ethics and values of that company. That's where you want to work, and that's where you want to spend your money. Overall, underrepresentation in diverse workforce in cybersecurity can limit the organization's ability to effectively protect their systems and their data, leaving them more vulnerable to cyber threats, resulting in a potential reputational and financial damage. So again, why does representation matter? As humans, we all have unconscious bias. And while we all have good intentions, we may not recognize or be aware of that bias. The first step to interrupting unconscious bias in decision-making is to recognize and acknowledge that biases exist. Be aware of the role that biases play in decision-making and be open to address them. One thing here at AWS that we do is we have an individual labeled as a bias interrupter. So a bias interrupter is someone that has gone through unconscious bias trainings, and they are aware and know how to recognize and spot when there's unconscious bias infiltrating a conversation or a decision-making, especially in our hiring decisions and or meetings. They call it out, and then we reset the conversation to remove any bias. Data has shown that diverse decision-making teams lead to better performance. Diversity within cybersecurity teams improves cross-team communication, bridging that gap between the technical solutions and the people in the organization that you're supporting. Diverse perspectives can improve collaboration, innovation, and communication. Organizations that focus on building diverse teams are more likely to be profitable. Companies with highly diverse teams notice a significant increase in their cash flow to the tune of 2.5 times per employee. The long-term resilience of a company is linked to their ability to embrace and harness diversity. So now I'm going to hand it over to Amani to go through a case study of how to build accessible security solutions in generative AI.
Thank you so much, Ashley. You've done a wonderful job explaining why representation matters. So hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and take you with a use case, and we're going to go ahead and meet the Johnson family. First up, meet the Johnsons. Meet the mom. So the mom likes to think of herself as a cool mom. She loves home decor, and she wants to be a college engineer. The mom likes to advocate for diversity and inclusion efforts at work. She's a member of the Black Employee Network, and she also is a member of the Alliance for Accessibility. Next up, meet the dad. So the dad loves to tell dad jokes. I don't know about you, but when my dad tells them, they're never really funny, and it embarrasses my friends, but he loves to tell them anyhow. And this makes him my dad. My dad is called on for every little inconvenience, as most dads are. They're expected to fix things around the house when they break. They help me with different life issues. And that's just pretty much what the dad does here. Next up, meet the grandma. So the grandma loves to bake cookies. She loves them. And they're actually really delicious. But at the same time, she won't talk to you when her stories are on. Now, I don't know if everyone is familiar with stories, but in my culture, stories include soap operas from back in the day that people would watch, and when they're on, they don't like to be interrupted. The grandma also thinks that she is your personal tech support. I don't know about you, but my grandma, she thinks that because I'm in a tech field, that means that I can fix every technical problem that she has in her home. Rather it's something with the TV or her cell phone, she thinks that it's my job to fix it. And I try to explain to her that I work in the cloud, but she will never understand the difference. So yet she is still called upon. Next up, meet the granddaddy. So the granddaddy always has a back in the day story on hand. He won't talk to you when the basketball game is on. You can forget it. His focus is just on the game. The granddaddy also is a very, very passionate person who shows up to all of your sporting events. The granddaddy thinks that they still got it. Next up, meet the son. So the son loves to play pranks on their sister. You can bribe them to keep your secrets, but they're always getting into trouble. Next up, meet the daughter. So the daughter can't wait to be an adult. She's tired of living under her parents' rules. She wants to date, but at the same time, she can't figure out what to wear to prom. Next up, meet the nosy neighbor. So the nosy neighbor is always at your house, uninvited, eating your food, drinking your drinks, but they always know everybody's business in the neighborhood. They have all the latest gossip and all the latest tea. So you know that you can get some type of juicy information out of them. At the same time, the neighbor loves their music. They will blast their music at any time of night or any time of the day, but sometimes you don't mind because it's actually good music. Now, what does everyone in the Johnson family have in common? Everyone in the Johnson family is a person with a disability. According to the United Nations, there are over 1 billion people around the world with some form of disability, but only 3% of the World Wide Web is fully accessible for people with disabilities. So, you have to ask yourself, when dealing with different types of disabilities, what are some of the different categories that are ascribed to people with disabilities? You have cognitive disabilities, you have auditory disabilities, you have mobility disabilities, as well as visual disabilities. Cognitive disabilities can include things such as dyslexia. It can include short-term memory loss, as well as long-term memory loss. Things with auditory disabilities. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a loud concert and the music was really great and you were having the time in your life, but then afterwards you had a constant ringing in your ear that wouldn't go away and you couldn't hear as normal as you could. That's happened to me too. I see you are. That's actually an auditory disability. Auditory disabilities can be temporary, they can be situational, or they can be permanent. Until the ringing in your ears goes away and you can hear as you were able to beforehand, that is an auditory disability. Next up, we have mobility disabilities. Mobility disabilities affect things when it comes to a person's bodily functions. It can also affect their sensations. Next up, we have visual disabilities. Visual disabilities can include things such as color blindness. It can include being blind, and as well as being able to have an impairment of sight. When looking at people with disabilities, disabilities can be situational, they can be temporary, or they can be permanent. How many of you have ever had a baby in your hands and your hands were full, but you had a text message and you still needed to be able to reply to that text message? I see you. That's actually considered a temporary disability. Not temporary, but a situational disability. Situational disabilities are disabilities that you have in that particular moment. When it comes to the case of the cell phone, until you are able to have your hands free again, then that is when you have a situational disability. Next up, we have temporary disabilities. So temporary disabilities are disabilities that you have for a particular point of time, but you're expected to make a full recovery. For instance, say you broke your leg and you were placed in a wheelchair until you could recover. That is an example of a temporary disability. You would need accessibility enhancements and features during that time period, such as a wheelchair ramp, but after you have healed and fully recovered, you will no longer need it. But during that point in time, that is considered a temporary disability. You also have permanent disabilities. Permanent disabilities are disabilities that you have throughout the remainder of your lifetime. Examples of permanent disabilities can include things such as if you have a stroke and you are left with physical impairment for the rest of your life afterwards. Now, why does this matter? This matters because of digital inclusion. Digital inclusion is set to make sure that everyone feels represented. How many of you have ever had a product or you knew out in the start that when you saw a particular product that you knew it would never work for you, it wasn't for your use case, so it was no bother even being able to look into it? That's happened to me as well. Digital inclusion seeks to disrupt this. It's to ensure that everyone can be included when you're creating a product, because everyone should feel represented. When you think about digital inclusion, you think about accessibility. Accessibility ensures that people with disabilities can complete the same tasks as those without disabilities. Now, when you think of digital inclusion in the age of AI, what exactly do you think of? And what exactly is AI? So AI produces net new content. With regular search, you get a bunch of different results that are populated from different data sources based off of content that already exists. With AI, you end up with something new. AI takes a bunch of different sources that are already existing, but it gives you something brand new as a result. So let's look at people in the Johnson family and how they would each use AI. So when you look at the mom, how would the mom use AI? So we know that the mom is a cloud engineer. We know that she likes to build security solutions at work. With regular search, what the mom can do is she can go and look through different AWS documentation that already exists, and she can come up with a security solution. However, let's say that the mom does not have the time to look through every single AWS documentation that exists. With generative AI, what the mom can do is she can ask for it to generate a security solution for her use case. AI would then come up with a new security solution that uses different AWS documentation as the RAG source. Let's look at the dad in AI. We know that the dad loves to tell dad jokes, and his jokes are never really funny. With regular search, what the dad can do is he can look and come up with jokes that already exist. But no one ever laughs with those jokes because they're not funny. People have heard them before. With AI, what the dad can do instead is come up with a new joke. And because this joke is new and no one has ever heard it before, everyone actually laughs. Now, how would the daughter use AI? So we know with the daughter that the daughter can't figure out what she wants to wear to prom. With regular search, the daughter can be able to come up with different prom dresses that already exist and different prom designs that already exist and that are out there. However, let's say the daughter does not want to show up in the same dress that her friends have, and she wants something that's entirely unique. With generative AI, the daughter can ask for a prom dress that is unique to her style. With this, she can be ensured that she shows up to prom not looking like anyone else. Now, how would the grandma use AI? So we know that the grandma loves to bake cookies. And every year, the grandma enters the holiday cookie contest. But she never wins. But this year, she knows for a fact that this is my year. I'm going to win the contest. How would that work with regular search? The grandma could decide to go online and use regular search to come up with cookie recipes that already exist. But this year, the grandma really wants to win, and it's going to be her year. The grandma could use generative AI, and she can ask for cookie recipes and to ask for new cookie recipes, one that never existed before. This year, because the grandma uses a cookie recipe that was created with generative AI, she came up with such a unique cookie that she won the cookie contest. Everyone loved her cookie was enjoyable, and this actually was her year. Now, how would the granddaddy use generative AI? The granddaddy loves to tell back in my day stories. With regular search, what the granddaddy could do is look for a particular story from a particular time period. The granddaddy could look for a story from the 60s, from the 70s, or from the 80s, and he can be able to tell that to his grandchildren. But let's say the granddaddy wants a new story from a particular time period, such as the 60s, 70s, or 80s. The granddaddy can then turn to generative AI in order to get a story from one of those specific time periods. But it would be a new story that's set in the style of the 60s, or the 70s, or the 80s. Now, how would the son use AI? So we know that the son loves to play pranks on their sister. And at this point in time, the son has used regular search time and time again and has exhausted all of the possibilities for different pranks that could be returned from regular search. So the son now turns to generative AI to come up with a new prank. The son is able to successfully use generative AI to come up with a prank to prank their sister. With this new prank, the sister is actually scared, she's annoyed, and the son is able to laugh. Now, how would the nosy neighbor use AI? So we know that the nosy neighbor loves their music, and more specifically, they love Beyonce. How would the nosy neighbor want to use regular search to be able to listen to Beyonce? Then what the nosy neighbor could do is go through regular search and pull up the Beyonce's entire catalog in order to listen to music by Beyonce. But this time around, the neighbor wants a new song in the style of Beyonce. The neighbor can then turn to generative AI to ask for a song in the style of Beyonce. That way they can still be able to listen to music that is in the style of Beyonce, but they have a new song to listen to. So when you think about everyone in the Johnson family, and you look at their different use cases, when coming up with generative AI solutions, you have to ask yourself, how do you make AI accessible? So we know everyone in the Johnson's family is a person with a disability. With each and every person, we have to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that everyone can still use a generative AI product? We should first think that accessibility is not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. There are multiple customer paths that you're going to have to account for when creating generative AI products. Each and every person is unique. The way in which we can do something does not mean that it should not be considered in how we implement those solutions. So when you think about the customer journey, you have to think about multiple things. When it comes to accessibility, you have to ask yourself who. Who is it that you're designing for? Who is your customer? In this particular case, it would be people with disabilities. When you think about people with disabilities, you have to ask yourself, how does representation matter? Everyone should be able to do the same task. Even if the way in which they do the task differs, it does not mean that they cannot do it. You also have to think about what. When thinking about people with disabilities, you have to think about their individual and unique journeys. We all have unique journeys to be able to complete tasks, and we might not complete them in the same way. When thinking about people with disabilities, you need to be able to understand that the way in which they interact with your application can differ greatly based on their particular disability. You also have to ask yourself how. If you're thinking about people with disabilities, you have to ask yourself, how do you develop and how do you implement solutions that are accessible? You have to understand the implementation considerations and trade-offs that you have when designing for people with disabilities. When you think about people with disabilities and you think about the Johnson family, we're going to look at some of the different design considerations that are had with different people with disabilities. So first up, we're going to look at cognitive disabilities. So what are some considerations for people with cognitive disabilities? So first up, you want to make sure that you make sense of the data and how you visualize your data. You should pay attention to how you organize the data. You should group related content together, but you should also break it up so that it's easy to read. You should also organize your information by headings and subheadings and to be consistent in the headings and subheadings that you use. You should also stay connected to the metadata. By staying connected to the metadata, you're able to provide resources for people with cognitive disabilities to be able to get additional information to read up on the sources in which your data came from. In addition, you should always be honest with the prompts that you return from your generative AI application. If you have an application and a user asks a question, but your AI application does not have the answer, instead of making up an answer, you should relay to the user that at this point in time, you do not have enough information to be able to generate an answer. This earns trust with your user. Next up, you should make sure that you have a quick setup. People with cognitive disabilities need a quick setup so that they can stay focused on the task at hand. By making tasks too complicated to get started with, it can take away from your application. Next up, you should have consistency. If you have an AI application that makes use of multiple pages, you should be consistent across the pages within your application. Being consistent makes your application feel more native and easy to use. Keeping your application simple and easy allows the users to have a flow, which enhances their customer path and customer journey. Next up, when it comes to people with cognitive disabilities, you should also make sure that your application makes use of clear language. The directions that your application has needs to be clear and concise and to the point so that people can follow along within your application. By having clear and concise information, it allows people with cognitive disabilities to ensure that they can complete a task without being misguided. Next up, we're going to look at people with auditory disabilities. And what are some of the design considerations for people with auditory disabilities when building generative AI products? So when dealing with people with auditory disabilities, one of the first design considerations is readability. Readability is very important to people with auditory disabilities. You should be able to make sure that each and every element within your AI application can be read in a way that is consistent and to the point. You should make sure that you are clear in your communication style so that people with auditory disabilities can still follow along. You also need to make use of multimedia within your AI application. But when you do so, you have to make sure that you account for people with auditory disabilities. For instance, if your AI application is going to return videos, you should be able to ensure that each one of the videos that it returns has closed captioning. In addition to closed captioning, you should make sure that people with auditory disabilities can control the volume within their AI application so that they can increase or decrease the sound based off of their need. Also, you should provide visual cues for people with auditory disabilities. So when you provide visual cues, you should be able to ensure that if you have any type of generative AI application that uses speech to text or text to speech, that people with auditory disabilities can still follow along. Visual cues can help to signal what comes next within your application so people with auditory disabilities do not get lost and can still follow along. Next step, you want to pay attention to your language. Language matters. People with auditory disabilities, they speak multiple languages around the world. Your AI application needs to be able to account for this. By being able to allow your end user to select the language choice or the items that are returned, it makes the user feel included. You should make sure that when you have different languages, that they are represented honestly and consistently, so that people with auditory disabilities can still know what is going on and they can understand what is being communicated. So next step, we're going to look at some of the considerations for people with mobility disabilities. So what are some of the design considerations for people with mobility disabilities? So first up, navigation is going to be extremely important. Raise your hand if you've ever tried to be able to navigate through an entire page, but you've only had to do it using your keyboard. If you've tried to do that, you will know that it can be an extremely difficult task to complete. Sometimes within an application, not every element on a page is navigatable via keyboard. That makes it a very inconsistent experience for people with mobility disabilities. You should make sure that within your AI application, that people with mobility disabilities can navigate to every element within your application using just a keyboard. In addition, you should take into account audio. When designing for people with mobility disabilities, audio is going to matter. Not everyone can make use of a keyboard. So being able to provide an option for speech to text and text to speech is really important to people with audio disabilities. Excuse me, not audio disabilities, but mobility disabilities. When thinking about people with mobility disabilities, audio is definitely going to matter. When thinking about audio, you want to make sure that your AI chatbot can account for multiple languages that are spoken around the world. That is going to be able to make sure that people with mobility disabilities can still be able to ask the chatbot their questions and be able to get consistent responses back. But if your application does not account for a particular language, it's best that your application communicates that. When thinking of audio and people with mobility disabilities, you also want to make sure that if you have an AI application that's returning any type of code, that people can still follow along. You should make sure that the code itself is accessible. This can include things such as including comments within your code and providing multiple options for people to be able to copy the code for their use case. You also need to think about people with mobility disabilities and how that they can interact with assistive technology. Your AI application should be compatible with different assistive technology that comes onto the market. It's important that you test your application to make sure it works with a broad variety of assistive technology. When designing for people with mobility disabilities, you also want to eliminate time constraints. By putting time constraints on the end user, it can create a negative experience for them. It can make them feel rushed to be able to complete something on a page. By taking away the sense of time and allowing people to be able to do things within their own time and in their own style, it creates a sense of ease. And it makes sure that the user doesn't click away from your application and that they increase the activity that they have within your particular AI application. So next up, we're going to look at people with visual disabilities. What are some of the design considerations for people with visual disabilities? So first up, when it comes to people with visual disabilities, you're going to want to think about the size of your text. Text size is going to matter. You should have options within your AI application to increase or decrease your font size. In addition to text size, the weight of your text is also going to matter. You should choose fonts with heavier weight so that it stands out on the page. You should also avoid certain colors when it comes to the text because that way people do not get lost. You should also think about color contrast. Color contrast is very important with people with visual disabilities. You want to ensure that the pictures that you use, that the text that you use, that it stands out. By ensuring that it stands out and that it has a high color contrast ratio, you ensure that people with visual disabilities can still be able to see what is being communicated on the page. Next step is screen readers. If you have an AI application that relies on screen readers, and if you know that you have your end user being able to need screen readers, then you want to account for that with people with visual disabilities. Screen reader technology is going to be very important for your AI application. It's important because it's going to communicate to people who may not be able to visually see in the traditional sense. It'll still be able to communicate to them what is on the page. Just because someone may not be able to physically see something on the page, it does not mean that they can't see and know what is there. Alternative text is very important to be able to help with this. Alternative text within your AI application should be clear, it should be concise, and it should honestly reflect what is being displayed on a page. That means that the pictures that you have, it means that any videos that you have, that the alternative text is present and true so that people with visual disabilities can still follow along and know what is being communicated on a page. So now when we look at building accessible AI products, we know that we've captured the customer's journey. We've looked at the voice of our customer, and we've understood that each and every person with a disability may have a different path to be able to use your application. We also know that we have to work backwards from people with We have to work backwards from people with disabilities. Working backwards from people with disabilities and ensures that they are included throughout the entire software development lifecycle. This helps to promote digital inclusion. Digital inclusion works to make sure that everyone is represented. And by being able to be aware of people with disabilities and the design considerations that they need and the path that they need during the age of AI, it will make AI more accessible for people with disabilities so they do not get left behind. So now that we've looked at our customer use case and we looked at the Johnson family, and we've talked about some of the different customer paths, we next need to look about how do we document accessibility features. So when you keep track of accessibility features, the first thing that you want to do is keep a run book. By keeping a run book, you can keep track of all of the different accessibility features that you have within your application. A run book will talk about the different design choices that you've made, as well as the different design considerations and the design choices that are within your AI application. A run book will talk about how you account for different testing. It'll talk about how you handle cases in which you might have a misconfiguration and how you navigate that. And it'll also discuss how do you commit to the end user and how do you communicate some of the different changes. Next step, you need to test your product. It's important that any AI application is tested, but when you test your product, you need to make sure that you include people with disabilities within your test case. Oftentimes, people with disabilities are left out of the use case and usability testing. That's extremely hurtful to people with disabilities. People with disabilities have the potential to be your biggest customer. They have the potential to be some of the biggest influencers. People with disabilities, when it comes to social media, like Twitter, for example, they have some of the most liked tweets. But at the same time, when it comes to photos and things, their tweets aren't like that much. People with disabilities have unique ideas and unique perspectives, and that really should be captured in the heart of your AI product. It's also important that you iterate often. It's imperative to iterate often when you are designing for people with disabilities. There are new assistive technologies that come out that need to be tested with your application. And in addition to new products, sometimes there's new features and enhancements that come out in product that already exists. Your AI application really needs to take account of this so that you can ensure that everyone can still use your product. So when you think about digital inclusion, you have to just ask yourself, what exactly and who exactly is responsible for digital inclusion? Digital inclusion is everyone's responsibility. Digital inclusion takes place during the entire software development lifecycle. It's important to communicate that early on and to capture that early on in the early stages of your AI application so that no one gets left behind. You also have to ask yourself what exactly it is that you're developing and what exactly it is that you're solving for when developing your AI application to account for people with disabilities. Representation matters. So when you think about how do you design any type of accessible product, you need to be able to capture people with disabilities and their specific needs. People with disabilities may have multiple disabilities. So when it comes to that, you need to be able to reflect that in the customer path, in the customer journey that you account for within your AI product. You also have to ask yourself how. How do you start to change the narrative when it comes to people with disabilities and accounting for them when building generative AI products? The best place to start is with education. You should educate yourself. You should educate your fellow team members. You should educate your families about the importance of accessibility. The more that we talk about accessibility and the more that we promote it, we can be able to close that 97% gap when it comes to being fully accessible on the web. Next up, I'm going to hand it over to Ashley, who will do the call for action.
Awesome. Thanks, Amani. Thank you for that fun and very, very informative case study. I know I've continued to learn from you, and I hope everybody else did as well. So in Dr. Werner Vogel's shared during his 2023 reInvent keynote that accessibility is non-negotiable. Here at AWS, we believe that accessibility is everyone's job, and digital experiences will only be accessible if we all build with intention and care. So, our call to action to you today, be that bias interrupter. If you see unconscious bias bleeding into your team discussions, no matter what it is, don't be afraid to stand up and acknowledge that there's bias in the decision making. Create that culture of inclusion. You want to foster a culture that values and celebrates diversity and inclusion, and this could include policies and practices that promote fairness and equity for all. You want to build with intention. Organizations of any size can build accessible products. Understand the customer journeys that Amani just walked through and build products and services with accessibility in mind. Embedding accessibility throughout your product, you can actually have your engineers talk with accessibility experts to make sure that that's being included. Also, testing. That was a great tip, and honestly, we need to make sure that in our user groups and user testing, it includes people with disabilities as well. We really want to learn, I encourage all of you to learn and be curious about ID&E and accessibility. We have a really great opportunity here at Inforce. We have the All Builders Welcome Lounge, which I encourage all of you to stop by if you haven't already. You'll get to see some of our amazing nonprofit partners, such as WESUS, and Cyversity. I support the girls, as well as our USA Amputee Football Club. You'll also get to meet some of us that are members of affinity groups, such as our Black Employee Network, or our People with Disabilities, among many others. So I definitely encourage you to visit our All Builders Welcome Lounge. And lastly, pay it forward. If you learned something here today, tell your friends, tell your teammates. Acknowledging it and talking about diversity and accessibility goes a long way. And here are some resources. So in April 2024, AWS launched accessibility conformance reports in our AWS artifact. Accessibility conformance reports are documents that show how our services, AWS services, conform with accessibility requirements and standards. They are, again, located in AWS Artifact, which is a central resource for security and compliance reports. The AWS Accessibility Conformance Reports utilize the ITI Voluntary Product Accessibility Templates and reference various accessibility standards, not only from the US, but globally. So I encourage you to check them out today. As well as, feel free to check out our AWS Accessibility homepage. It consists of a lot of blogs and other information, as well as talks, such as this one will be posted there as well. But you'll have a whole central repository for accessibility resources through AWS. And one call out too, we just dropped a 3 easy steps to make your products more accessible by Justine Palisades. She's the head of accessibility at AWS. She dropped that blog on May 16th, which if you did not know, that is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So hopefully you just learned that May 16th is a special day as well. It's an opportunity to celebrate those people with disabilities around the world and draw attention to accessibility. So with that, Amani and I would like to say thank you. Thank you for prioritizing accessibility, diversity, and we really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.